Welcome, everybody, to the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation Cybersecurity Chat Series. We really appreciate the fact that you've joined us today for this series speaker, and we are privileged to have Laura Nelson with us today. She is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation and has joined us in 2019 and has just been a bundle of energy as we begin to roll out our education program, which this is one of our centerpieces for our education program. She has had over 37 years with the National Security Agency, 15 of those years as a senior executive. That's the highest rank within NSA. Most of her time was spent in the signals intelligence side of the house, but she also worked in the information assurance side, the computer security side, so to speak, and in the operations directorate. So she's seen the entire spectrum of NSA. She's an electrical engineer with a master's of science in electrical engineering from Johns Hopkins, and she got her bachelor's from Virginia Tech. So it gives me great honor and privilege to introduce our boss, Laura Nelson, to you, and you're in for a treat today. Laura, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that very kind introduction. And it's great to have everybody online today and to see everybody. And I'm really excited to talk today about engineering and why it's important to have women and STEM and in engineering, and share a little bit of my own story and some of where I came from. So let's begin with, I have really sophisticated graphics for this. So this is my first. Why engineering? Why not? So when I was young, I had all kinds of things I wanted to be when I grew up, but I really loved math and science. And fortunately, I had some very influential men in my life who encouraged me to pursue engineering. One, of course, was my father, my hero. And he just pushed me all along. You need to be an engineer. You need to consider this. And the other was I had a fantastic physics teacher. Loved him. He was just fun. He made physics fun, and he continually pushed as well, saying, you really should think about becoming an engineer. So I did. And when I went out on the college search, I had to find a university that fit my needs. And so for me, that meant, I grew up in Baltimore and I wanted to get away from the city. I wanted something that was a little bit more rural, and I wanted a large school. I wanted to go to a big public school. I wanted to have sports teams because I'm a sports fanatic. So I wanted something where sports was really important. And, that's a great thing to have. Had to have an engineering program. And the other part was I wanted a cooperative education program. And for those of you who don't know what that means, that is, sometimes you hear about internships all the time, but cooperative education is a program run by the schools where you alternate periods of work with periods of school. So in my case, I went to school full-time my entire freshman year, and then I would alternate going to work for a quarter. We had quarters then, now it's semesters, but went to work, and then I go back to school, and then I go to work, and I split my sophomore and junior year into 3 years doing that, and then went back to school full-time for my senior year. So to me, I really wanted to find a co-op program. So of course I settled at Virginia Tech, and loved being a Hokie, and still talk about my times at Virginia Tech today. And they have a great engineering school. So when you think about the engineering, my next graphic. So this is where, and my next graphic was find an engineering or co-op opportunity. I was well prepared for school. I found, here I am going to this big school, and I didn't go to one of the top elite high schools. I went to a, middle of the road high school, but I found that I had great teachers, and they prepared me so well for this experience. So when I got there at Virginia Tech, I was well prepared. I look at students today. I do a lot of work on scholarships. I'm part of a program here in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. Scholarships for Scholars is what it's called. And I do a lot of the review. And I look at some of the experiences these high school kids have today and the opportunity they have before them. And I'm thinking, wow, just in the coursework that they can take, as well as internships, high school internships. So they have, so much more available today. But when I got to Virginia Tech, I decided to go into electrical engineering. Again, Dad had an influence. I was going to go into civil engineering and be like Dad. And he says, no, no, no. The need right now is for electrical engineers. You need to go do that. So when I got to engineering school, boy, what an awakening. There weren't that many women. Maybe 10% of my class was women at that time, especially in the electrical engineering field. Just not a lot of women go into it yet today. But again, I was getting into this and thinking, do I really like this? Am I going to enjoy engineering? And that's where the cooperative education part came in. And through that, I got my first job at NSA, at the National Security Agency, as a co-op student. And, that was just to help get to find out, first of all, do you like engineering? Do you like this work? And if you're going to be an electrical engineer, there are things that you could do. There's different disciplines you can go into. Find the things that you like, and also, more importantly, the things that you don't like. So for that, I think anybody who's going to go into the workplace, getting some kind of an apprenticeship. I think somebody earlier this week talked about apprenticeships, an internship, some kind of work experience as part of your education is just so, so important, because you'll find where your interests really lie and help you prepare for that job you're going to take when you get out of school. Okay, so now I've been a co-op for a couple years, and it's time to get into the real workforce. And so now it becomes real. So here we go. Was this a good idea, meaning going into engineering? Well, yes, it was, as it turns out it was. First of all, the opportunities, and this was in the mid-'80s, the opportunities for engineering was just boundless. There were jobs everywhere. There was no problem getting a job. So, and that was, just across the board in all engineering disciplines, but electrical engineering was especially good. But I have to admit, when I went into the workplace, I was somewhat naive. While I had this school experience where, I was one of a few women, when I got into NSA, wow, now suddenly I'm working there and I'm part of this engineering discipline. And often I was the only one in an organization or on a team. There were plenty of women working at the National Security Agency. A lot of them, there were analysts, linguists, cryptanalysts, those in the business fields. Many women, but never in the jobs that I was taking. I was often one of just a few, or the only one. So, that's something you had to kind of get used to. But, I found that I figured out how to navigate that pretty well. And when I looked at my offices in the beginning, I put, working as the only woman in an office a lot of times, I often looked at the workmates and I put them into 3 different categories. One was, I called them the dads. And the dads were those engineers that I was working with who were about the age of my dad, right? And now they suddenly have this young woman in the office, and they protected me like I was their daughter. And it was so fantastic to have them look after me. And they made sure that, that like sometimes I would go out in the lab and have to hold on to things and drill things. And they would just stand behind me, and they were worried because my hands were too small. They said, but your hands are so small. And so the dads became some of my early mentors. And, I still have friendship with some of these men today. The next word, I call them the challengers. And I don't know what else I would call them. They were the ones who were like 5 to 10 years ahead of me and really looked at somebody like me coming to the workforce kind of like a threat to some extent. So I really had to work hard to establish relationships with them and prove myself. I had to prove myself that, yeah, I might be, young, just out of college and a woman in this man's profession, but I can do this and I can handle this. So that worked out pretty well. It took a while to establish the relationships, but it worked out. And then the last group were my peers and my friends. And there are a lot of young folks that came in at that time. And so those were the people I worked with daily. They were part of my team and they were my friends. That was my social group. That was my peer group. So, so when I think about those early days and working in this environment, that was a really important group that you had to live with and work with every day. And as I said, for the most part, I felt fully accepted. There were occasions where maybe it wasn't as good. I mean, I have an interview experience I found, and this was back when I was a co-op, that was interesting. I went in and I had finally gotten another female co-op in the office with me, and we're getting ready to do our co-op tours, choose our next co-op tour. So we go, we're going to go see this office that everybody wants to go to because they do really, really fun work. So the two of us went together to do this interview, and we enter the room, and there's a man. He's very, very serious, and he's kind of looking at us and starts questioning me about where I go to school. And I tell him, and he says, well, my son goes there. I said, oh, who's your son? And he told me, and it turns out I knew his son, and his son was nothing like him. His son was really quite a character. So anyway, but then, so that's how the interview started. And we talked a bit. And then at the end, he says, I had a young woman enter into my workforce once. I had my reservations at first, but she was adequate. And so at that point, I said, wow, okay. I didn't take that job. We found another place to work for the next tour. Fortunately, things have changed a lot since that time, but it was just something that it was kind of eye-opening. Another thing that happened early in my career is when, I had one of these, I'd been working for a couple of years, and a new guy joined the office, and he asked me one day, he says, hey, can you help me with something out in the lab? I said, sure. So he said, take a look at this. I can't get this circuit to work. I can't make, can you help me with what's going on? And it was 10 seconds. I looked at it and said, well, you just have to connect ground. And he says, yeah, I knew that. I was just testing you to see if you knew what you were doing. And I thought, okay, well, at that point, I said, and all of my friends at that point disappeared because they knew that I was just going to let them have it. And so I did. And that's part of it. You had to learn to stand your ground. And I had to often, find myself, saying, hey, this is what I need. This is what we're going to do. And that's just part of growing up. So in the end, though, of course, it was a great idea to go. Okay, next. Play to your strengths. Find your voice. It's really important. I worked as a hardware development engineer for the first 8 years of my career. My first project is in the National Cryptologic Museum. It's kind of fun, right? I can say, hey, I did that. That's what I built. I was a pretty capable engineer, but I wasn't the best engineer. I mean, I wasn't, there were people who could run circles around me. I could get my job done. I did a great job. But I found that I had strengths that were in other areas. And where that was when we were working as a team. Early on, you tend to work on projects by yourself, but the further along you get, you have to really work as a team. And I found that as a team member, I was really good at pulling that team together and really bringing in all of the different parts of the project and really putting things together and making the team work as a team. So and it gave me joy. I mean, that was where I found my joy. So I started to move a bit more from doing the hardcore development to moving into more leadership type of positions. And this gets to why it's really important to have women and diversity. Let me just say women and diversity in STEM, because what you find is, especially when you get into a team environment, having all those different viewpoints is just so critical to doing the job well and having success. And, as a woman, I found that often I was the one who understood the social cues. I'm the one who could say, hey, we haven't heard from you to talk about what your part is in this project. Let me hear from you and tell me what your thoughts are on this. And I found that there are a lot of things that I brought to the table that others may not. And that's true in so many ways. You just have to build this diverse team, and you have to have, all types of people coming together, and that's when you're going to have the most success. And that's just been true time after time on things that I've worked on. Anyway, that's why I love having women in a STEM environment, love having diversity in the STEM environment. We just really need that. It's just so important for our nation. The finding your voice piece. The other thing that I found a lot is, especially, and this is true especially in this for women, and I think I've even found it more recently, finding your voice is so important, because you'll get into a team environment, and even I will do this to this day. You'll sit back and you won't speak up because you don't want to interrupt, or you don't want to be perceived as saying something that somebody finds not to be the smartest thing that somebody could say, whatever it is. But you got to figure out a way to get your voice heard. And sometimes that means when everybody's doing and they're all jumping in and saying everything and you haven't had that opportunity, sometimes you have to say, stop, I have something to say and you need to listen to me. And that's really difficult for some people to do, but you have to find your voice. I used humor to do it. In my case, it worked for me. That doesn't mean it works for everybody, but for me, that's how I got myself into the conversation. I was able to jump in and take advantage of, hey, I have something to say and I think it's important. And so finding your voice is just so, so important. And that has to do with, that's in all life skills, right? Anything you're going to do, you got to be able to find your voice. But when you're in the STEM environment, it's really critical because sometimes you'll find yourself maybe outnumbered, right? And figuring out how you have to do it. So I've mentored many women in this and talked to them about it at length. Okay, so my next one is take the challenge and create opportunities. So if you look today, the statistics are not good, right? I mentioned it was about 10% of women in EE when I was there. Today, it's not much better, right? Computer science is about 18% of women get a bachelor's degree. Electrical and computer engineering runs anywhere 14 to 16%. Engineering in general tends to be more 25%, but in the disciplines that are required for cybersecurity tends to be very low. So these opportunities out there are endless. There are over 500,000 jobs available in the cybersecurity field. That's just cybersecurity, let alone other STEM fields. When you go to, medical or other types of engineering, there's just so many opportunities. I know you've heard this. I'm sure we've used the 500,000 jobs number quite a few times. But you also think about a lot of these STEM fields, a lot of this you can do virtually from home. We've had a lot of experience working from home lately, but especially in computer science, that's something where you can do the job and work from home and, contribute virtually. And this is, while earlier in your career, that may not be the most important thing, but as you get along a little bit further and you have a family and you have other things to think about, being able to work from home becomes really important because now you can balance, getting that balance in your life, which to me was just such a critical part of, my job at NSA. Unfortunately, I never had, at NSA, we could never work from home. That just didn't happen. It was all classified. So you had to go into the office and you always had to work out for myself how I could achieve that balance. So there's just, I can't express enough how many opportunities there are for, anybody entering the STEM field, and just jump on it, take that challenge. The training may be difficult, the education, those classes are hard. I can tell you, taking field theory was not a fun class. I had a great year of it, didn't like it, but you know what? I got through it. If you think you can do it, just jump in and do it. Okay, now, going on, I moved again. Like I said, I moved away from doing the technical work, and now I became a manager. So here's an important thing. Find a mentor who shares your values. And this mentorship is just so important for anybody entering the workforce. So in my case, I did find a mentor, but it took a while. And, the way it worked for me was, it was in the mid-90s, I had a boss who said, you need a mentor. I said, okay, well, here's the deal. I need to have a mentor who meets the following criteria. Must be a woman, must be married, must have children, and have work-life balance. And he just looked at me and shook his head. So at NSA, he laughed. He said, sure, make it easy on me, Laura. So I said, okay. So at that time at the National Security Agency, there were so few women in senior leadership positions. And those who were had sacrificed to do that, meaning they didn't have families. They'd made decisions to not pursue, the things that some of the other people wanted. They decided not to get married, or they decided not to have families because they wanted to pursue their career. Why couldn't you have both? So at that point in time, very few women in those leadership ranks. And after failing to find a mentor who met the criteria, that boss of mine, still a friend of mine today, looked at me and says, well, it looks like you have to be that woman. You have to be that person that makes it to the senior ranks, has a family, has balance in their life, and can demonstrate that. And you need to be there for other women. And I'll tell you, I took it to heart. And I did that throughout my career. And I still mentor some of these women today, younger women who have families and find the struggles. And it's just so critical. I did find a mentor eventually. Didn't meet any of the criteria, but and it happened by accident. We ended up working on a team together, doing a really fun project when the EP-3 plane went down in Hainan, China, and the U.S. Navy plane went down in China, and the crew had to be rescued. We had to go back and get the crew and figure out what had happened. So I met my mentor through that experience. He's still my mentor today. I just talked to him yesterday. So find a mentor. And you can do that even as in high school. You can find somebody you want to talk to and talk about the challenges and things you want to do in the future, and just bounce ideas off. And you can have multiple mentors too, right? People who represent different aspects of you want different viewpoints, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now we get to the rest of the story, the epilogue. So my last one, you can make a difference, opportunity abounds. So I will say today, I'm happy to say there are many, many women at the National Security Agency who are in senior and in other intelligence community agencies who are in senior level positions. It did make a difference. Change did happen. People rose into the ranks. But the number of women in those technical career fields, as I said, still has remained the same. So the numbers coming in are still in that, anywhere from 18 to 25%, but the numbers are still low. I want to say for myself, that career offered me more opportunities than you can imagine. I was able to see the world, work with people across multiple nations and partners, and established friendships with people across the world. Saw places I would have never expected to see. And I got to go to Afghanistan, of all places, and, jump in and out of a helicopter to get my transport and figure out how to strap in and get my helmet and flak jacket on. I didn't see that happening. By the way, I was in my 50s when that happened, so that was kind of fun. So I got to do that. The other thing I was able to do is I took a 3-year tour to the Central Intelligence Agency. I was still an NSA employee, but I worked on a joint program there. And that's where you really get to see some interesting things, because first of all, I worked for a guy who I would call a rock star. He is just, he was probably the best leader I have ever come across in my entire career. He was just fantastic. So got to work for him, but mostly the big thing I got to see was a completely different culture. NSA is very techie, it's all about how electrons flow, right? That's what we care about. Relationships, who cares, right? No, and that's not true, but I mean, it was really a technical oriented. They do care about relationships. But at the CIA, when you go there, it's all about personal relationships. It's all about, and it's all built on trust. And where at NSA, your position bought you power, at the CIA, it buys you nothing. It's all about how you're perceived to be and do they trust you? And so it was a very different environment to work in. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself, and I also learned a lot about the agency that I'd been working for over 20 years at that point. You sometimes see the good, the bad, and the ugly when you're working someplace else and watching your own agency at work. So that was just a fantastic experience. I had some great training opportunities. I took this capstone class for general officers where I got to meet all these new general officers on the Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force, and just have a fantastic experience with them. Everything I've learned has helped me to grow. There's always challenges. Even to this day, you find that there's challenges and you have to grow and learn. It's not something where you ever stop. So for all of you, anyway, I hope that you will consider your careers in STEM, will consider going into engineering, computer science, and consider careers in the national security environment, whether at a different agency or someplace else. And also, as the CEO of the NCMF, I've just been really excited that we've had the opportunity to offer these seminars over the last 4 weeks. I was going to say 4 weeks. And glad to have some people who've repeated and come back a couple of times. Anyway, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Thank you, Laura. If you could share with us one of your, you talked about many challenges that you had during your career. If you could share with us one of the really cool, bright things, if you can, because I know a lot of the things you have to twirl in your mind, is it still classified or not? And so you got to do that little bit of a sync. But if you could share with us one of the really coolest engineering things you did, and then one of the challenges that you had that you specifically overcame to make a success?
Probably one of the coolest engineering things I did was back the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which was signed back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. I had the opportunity to build a system that was part of that. And it was interesting, while technically it wasn't a big challenge. Well, we got a little luck. So we got a little lucky on part of it. So I will say that. It probably would have been more difficult, but we got lucky on part of it. But it was fascinating, just fascinating, because here we were, face to face and working with people I would have never expected to be working with. But I had to build a system that was capable of processing data that was provided by a foreign country, typically an adversary. So that to me that was probably the most fascinating technical job that I had. And what was the next question you asked, Mark?
A challenge that you may have had that you're able to turn around into a success.
It wasn't a technical challenge, but it was a leadership challenge. And I think in my case, it was about, we had an unfortunate incident occur, let's just say that, where something went terribly wrong in one of my organizations and information got out that shouldn't have gotten out. And it was bad. Let me just say it was bad. It was bad from working with for partners, both foreign and domestic. Didn't go well. I think that the challenge was, I had to hold my head up high during that and run the organization, and I had to take responsibility for it. And I think that's the thing I learned most during that was, if you have integrity, you can do anything, and you can never lose your integrity. You've got to be able to say, this is on me. This is my organization. I was obviously not the one who pulled that plug that caused the bad thing to happen, but it was my responsibility. And I think through that, while it was painful, it was hurtful, it was hard. I had to turn an organization around. I had to get everybody behind me and do this. I think the thing I learned most was handling it with grace and dignity and keeping your integrity in check is probably the most important thing you could do. Anyway, that was my lesson.
Thanks, Laura. And we have a couple of really cool questions in the chat room. I'll try to summarize it. Some of the students are kind of looking at, and maybe it relates to this incident as well. Kind of, have you had to ever beat someone up? But it kind of then was reflected, has you ever been in a situation where it really went bad, and how did you handle that?
I remember this one. I remember this was during the Iraq War. We were in this situation and we had our partner, a partner agency in the room with us. And the guy I was working with over there, he was kind of a bully. I guess he liked to be he was a bully guy, right? And we were trying to work out something between us, and it was not getting to closure. So he has his people in the room, I have my people in the room, and then we have some of our people who are out in Iraq in the field as well on camera. And he gets up at time, I have to laugh about it, he stands up, he says, come on, Laura, we're going to go outside and we're going to work this out, right? Literally, I felt like I was going out to a fight. I wasn't sure. And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, what are you talking about? And he says, well, if you're not going to come, I'm going to leave. I said, okay. And I let him go. And his people are still in the room. And it was so funny because I sat there and my folks were just, okay, there she went. And I just stayed there and continued to conduct the meeting. Well, the funny part was he had driven up from Virginia. His ride was still in the room. He couldn't go anywhere. So eventually he had to come back in and we had to make peace. But that case, I felt like he was really bullying me, right? And I wasn't going to stand for it. And we eventually worked everything out, by the way, but it was a little bit challenging. Anyway, that's my little.
That's a great story. That is a really great story. We have another question that says, can you describe the most challenging written technical report or presentation that you've had to complete?
This is a technical report. It was technical, but in an interesting way. So one of the jobs that I got when I was at NSA, and I'm actually proud to say I did this, and other people say, you're crazy. This was the most insane assignment you ever had. 2013, Edward Snowden stole information from the National Security Agency. Lots and lots and lots of information. He's now in Russia, is living in Russia. And, from all accounts, he's not a good guy. for my point of view. Others look at him and say, oh, he was fighting for our freedom. But, most of us in the establishment who were working at the National Security Agency do not hold him in high regard.
Right.
When that happened, I had been working prior to that time before, when I'd worked when this plane went down in China. And I'd done this kind of a damage assessment before. So I got called into a meeting by this guy who I mentioned as my mentor. He always pulled me into this stuff. And I sat in this meeting, and there were attorneys there were people from organizations there was security there, and they were like, we want you to participate on this team. Well, they started talking, and I just drilled them with questions. Well, what about this? Have you thought about this? By the end of the day, I was running the team. Darn it, what did I do? So anyway, apparently I got that job. What was interesting, though, is now we had to get our arms around all of the information that he had potentially taken and figure that out in a short amount of time. So it was a technical challenge. How do we do that? But it's a huge writing challenge as well, because we had to put a report together to really articulate what was at risk, so that the nation's leaders knew what kind of information was out there potentially that could harm us. So we thought this started in early June, we thought we had till the end of July to complete this task. And on the 3rd of July, I got called into the deputy director's office, and they said, the president really wants this report on the 9th of July. This is the 3rd of July. I just told the team, do not come in on the 4th of July. Please don't come in. I'd let everybody go. And I said, the 9th of July, I literally almost cried, but I didn't. I held myself together, but I was in stunned silence for a minute. And you know what? I called everybody, said, get in here on the 5th. And you know what? We got that report together, and we got it out. And we got it out on the 9th of July, as the president had requested. And it was just, it was good. We did a great job. I had a great writer who was working it, but I was kind of like the editor in chief and pulling it together and making sure all the pieces were there. I would say that was the hardest thing I'd ever had to pull together. And it was a written assignment, if that helps.
Yeah, I remember that clearly. I was one of those little munions looking at everything and providing the input to the report.
There you go.
So that was an interesting time. Did you ever personally meet the president?
I didn't. And the reason was, he was coming, George Bush came to NSA multiple times. He really, truly loved NSA. And he came multiple times, like 4 times during his presidency, which is unheard of. I had the opportunity to meet him. We had a group he was going to come because my organization at that time was really working a lot of the counterterrorism mission. And so it was a technical organization. And they said, Laura, you have 3 spots at the meeting to meet with him. And, you can hand these tickets. They weren't tickets, but they were, entries into the room. And I thought about it, and I thought, there are people in this organization who are really working hard every day to make sure our systems are running. So I did a lottery, and I put the names of all the people who are working this hard, I put them in a hat, and I pulled the names out. And I handed those, I said, you get to go and meet the president. So I never did.
That's cool. Another question, how did your education in electrical engineering translate to your job at NSA?
So early on, of course, it was 100% what I was doing, right? I was building systems. I was wiring circuit boards. I was never a great coder, I'll be honest. And, we all talk about girls who code, but I would write code when necessary. But as I moved into leadership, every single job that I had required my technical background. At one point, I became the first woman to be the deputy of the cryptanalysis organization at NSA. It's a highly technical organization. It's mathematicians and a heck of a lot of engineering too. And so to hang in there with these guys and gals, I shouldn't say guys, but to hang in there, to be able to understand their problems and understand how we're going to get to solution absolutely required my technical background and my understanding of engineering and my understanding of how you build systems and how you go about this. So I'd say it carried me through in every single job that I had at NSA. Even at the end, one of the guys I was working with, he came in and he was chatting with me one day and he said something. I said, what do you think my background is? I'm just curious. Do you know? He says, I don't know what your degree is, but I 100% know you have a technical degree. And I think you're an engineer, but there's no question you have a technical degree. So it carried me through.
Cool. When you were in other countries, did you notice any more inclusivity towards females than in this country with respect to engineering?
definitely in some. I think Israel is a great example. Women are 100% part of their technical workforce, right? I would say the UK is pretty good, but their numbers look probably a little similar to ours, maybe a little bit better, but their numbers look a lot like ours. So I think in general, it's a problem across the world, but maybe some are a little better than others, if I were to think about.
What was the worst situation where you were discriminated as a woman?
There was a job. I was working as what they called like a deputy branch chief. We had 30 people. I was like at the second level of leadership. The guy who was in charge was leaving. I wanted the job. I deserved the job. I should have had the job. I was 8 months pregnant. And when it came time to give that job to somebody, they gave it to a guy who was coming back from another assignment because he needed a job. And they said, well, you're not going to be around for a couple months anyway. I felt that was discrimination because, not only was I a woman, I happened to be pregnant at the time too. And, but I deserved that. And I think that one was one that, I eventually left the organization as a result. I hung in there for a while to let the guy get in, but then I said, I got to find my own, I got to go someplace else. And I did. And I found another position because I thought, I can do better than this. So.
What is something you wish you would have known before going into electrical engineering?
As a technical skill, I wish I would have known how to do some coding. Oh my gosh. Had not done any of it. And I'll tell you what a steep learning curve it required for me when I got into college. So anybody who's going to go into an engineering discipline, get those skills ahead of time. And so that was certainly something that I needed help. and I felt I was behind because I just, where I'd gone to high school, there were no opportunities to do that. And, certainly didn't have a computer at home or anything like that. So for me, that was probably the one thing I wish I had done ahead of time.
And I have one that's rather interesting. So it'll be interesting how you answer this one. What did you think about the organization as a newbie compared to once you settled down and were a senior? So I'm kind of taking about that. Was there some type of different perspective coming into NSA versus once you were ingrained inside?
So some of this happens because the change in the organization was so big. So when I got in there in the mid 80s, NSA was a much smaller organization, but also I found as a newbie, it was all about, I was oblivious to the bureaucracy around me. I didn't see it. I had my job. I had the things I was going to do. I occasionally had to knock down a wall or something or kick down a door to get things I needed, but it was always on a more micro level. And everything was I felt family oriented. It felt like, my teammates were my friends. We would hang out together. We were in each other's weddings. We did all of that. So, as a newbie, I looked at it as this is a very family oriented organization. As I rose up through the ranks, first of all, NSA grew exponentially, but I found there was less of that family feel to it, right? And I also saw more of the bureaucracy. I saw more of the big roadblocks and the challenges that were there that just seemed so insurmountable at times. And I think that's the biggest thing. And it's a little bit of time caused that, but it's also when you get up to this higher level, you kind of look and you say, wow, it's cultural, right? Every organization has its culture. And sometimes changing the culture to be more productive is so hard. So anyway, that's probably what I would say.
Thanks, Laura. As we get towards the conclusion of our session here, is there something you'd like to, we have a lot of students online. If a last parting advice on what they need to do now to make sure they're ready for what's in front of them. I put in the chat room, students, a link to cyberseek.org, which will talk to the 500,000 openings and where they are and what you need and what type of background, what the jobs are. But Laura, if you could kind of share in your mentoring hat what you would like these students to do now to prepare for those types of jobs.
Yeah. So I'm assuming when we're talking about this, going into engineering, STEM type of jobs, right. I would say take the hard classes in high school. Really challenge yourself. Take as many of those, going up through calculus. My daughter had the opportunity to take up through calculus 3 in high school. I didn't have that ability, but just wasn't offered. But take those hard math and science classes, because maybe you'll be taking them again in college, right? In some cases, maybe you can AP, through your AP test can get out of some of them. But I think that the more you prepare yourself technically in high school, the better you will be in college. Learn to code. That's the other one, right? My lesson, right? Learn to code. Learn how to be able to manipulate computers and manipulate technology as you need to do so, because I think it'll just make you that much better in the end for doing that. And also find a mentor. Find a mentor now. If you can find somebody, if anybody, I'm happy to talk to any of you, by the way, if you want to reach out. I think they can provide you with my contact information, but I'll talk to you, talk about my experience, maybe help you navigate that path as well.
Well, I do want to thank all the students for being here. We have a huge crowd today, and I really appreciate all the questions in the chat room. I hope you took away from this particular session the importance of engineering and the importance of STEM, and how we really do need you to help us protect this nation. So on behalf of the Cyber Center for Education and Innovation, home of the National Cryptologic Museum, we thank you for being here. Laura, thank you for being our guest today and sharing your insights. And with that, we bid you adieu.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was good seeing you guys again. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.